Do you ever feel totally stressed out? If you're a mom, I'm pretty confident the answer is yes. Although, in all honesty, if you're a human, I'm pretty sure that the answer is yes. We all struggle with stress sometimes. And we've been in a little series here on the Love Your People Well podcast, taking a look at some of the really common, really hard emotions of motherhood and family life. We've talked about overall dealing with just out of control emotions. We've talked about our thought life. We've talked about depression, anxiety, anger. And this week, we're talking about stress and burnout. And specifically, we're going to take a look at boundaries. Because if you're feeling stressed out, then at somewhere along the line, somewhere in your life, there are some boundaries that are not quite where they could be. And if you really want to get rid of the stress, manage the stress so that you're not burnt out and you can actually enjoy family life and deepen those relationships and be fully present in those moments with your kids and your husband and just enjoy them, well, boundaries are going to help you get there. So I'm really excited for this conversation today. It's going to be super practical and really helpful. And trust me, I'm preaching to myself as much as I'm talking to you. So if you are ready to build up those boundary skills, manage the stress, and get back to enjoying family life, you're in the right place. Let's jump into today's conversation. Welcome to the Love Your People Well podcast. We're here to build healthy, happy, and holy family relationships. I'm Jess, a marriage and family therapist, a Christian, a wife, a mom, and I believe God creates us for relationships. Relationship with Him and with each other. So if you want to build a strong marriage, connect with your kids, find peace and purpose at the end of those crazy days, and keep Jesus at the center of it all, you're in the right place. Stick around, friend, and let's get started. Well, friends, as I said in the introduction, we are diving into the topic of stress and burnout. How do we manage these hard emotions? Why are they such a struggle? Is it even possible to go through life in our modern, busy, hectic world without feeling stressed out? Now, I just want to be completely honest right here at the start. I don't think it's necessarily realistic to expect that you will never have a day in your life again where you feel stressed out. There's a lot of reasons for that, but really, I think it boils down to we live in a really crazy, busy world. And family life is not only busy and crazy, but it has a lot of different people involved. Relationships and dynamics are always changing. And part of human nature is to carry some of that control, or at least the desire for it, on our own shoulders. Even though we know the Lord says we shouldn't do that, we don't need to do that, that's what we do. And so even with the best boundaries, even with following every tip I could have for you about managing stress and managing burnout, there's gonna be moments here and there where you feel a little stressed out. That's pretty normal. The goal is that that does not become the defining feature of your life, and especially of your home and of your family. It's almost a badge of honor these days when people will say, "Hey, how are you?" to say, "I'm busy, I'm tired, I'm stressed." Like some version of that is super normal, and we just accept it sometimes as if like, "Oh, well, of course you are. You're a mom, of course you're stressed. You're really busy, of course you're stressed." My goal is that that does not need to be one of the primary adjectives that describes your life. I'm not necessarily aiming today that we never experience stress ever again in our lives. What we need to do is figure out, how do we try to avoid it, and how do we manage it when it pops up? And we're going to tackle that by looking at boundaries. Now, I'll remind you of my usual disclaimer that I am a licensed counselor in South Carolina. a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family counselor. But of course, the podcast, it's not professional. This is not therapy. I am not your therapist. If you're feeling stressed out, I hope our conversation today is helpful and encouraging. But if this is a really deep-seated issue and you just cannot move past it and it's really causing a lot of disruption in your life, you might want to think about a more professional help. Talk with your pastor, find a counselor, or talk with a friend. You don't have to start at the highest level of care. There's a lot of people in your life, I know, who are also struggling with stress, struggling with burnout. You are not alone. So let's start by just acknowledging together what we're talking about when we talk about stress. What does that even feel like? Because it really can be so normalized that we don't always even realize it's happening. So some examples of kind of warning signs that would tell you, oh, wait a minute, maybe I should deal with this, would be if you're always feeling on edge, always feeling a little bit behind or like there's too much to do, and you're feeling worried about that or responsible about that or discouraged by that. Your emotions are kind of tied up in how busy you are. You also might experience a lot of trouble with sleeping. You might be getting sick a lot or feeling ill. Our immune system tends to go down when we're really highly stressed out for a long season of time. You might be dealing with a lot of irritability, just complaining and grumbling and just kind of always not quite in your best mood. And a lot of us, when we're feeling really stressed, we enter this zone of what is commonly called fight, flight, or freeze. The stress leads us to either fight it, like now I'm irritable and I'm complaining, and if you do one thing that gets on my nerves or is off my plan, I'm going to lash out, I'm going to let you know. We have conflict. But sometimes we flee from it. Fight, flight, or freeze. Sometimes we just kind of run away. We enter denial zone. This can really start to lead us into burnout, just like shutting down. I'm so stressed. I'm so busy. I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to kind of give up. I don't think I can be successful anyway. And for others of us, we do more of the freeze. Fight, flight, or freeze is a really common kind of our options for how we naturally respond to a highly stressful situation or season of life. And some of us, we just freeze. We kind of keep doing the things, but we try to almost numb ourselves emotionally. That could look a variety of ways: overeating on the sugar or drinking too much or any number of things. But we just try to, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to numb myself to the emotions of it. That also means you're probably numbing yourself to connection with your people, with your family. These are not typically the things we want when we think about family life. We don't want to be getting sick all the time, be irritable, be living in denial. We want to enjoy family life. And we've already talked a little bit about why it is that even Christians struggle with stress and burnout, just because of how busy life is. But I want to also highlight a spiritual reality that many times we struggle because at the core, at our heart, we're trusting in our own strength to get things done, or even just we're trusting in our own strength, our own abilities to enjoy family life, to make our family look the way we hope it will look, instead of trusting in God's strength and God's plan. But today, we're really taking a look at that practical piece that a lot of times we struggle with stress and burnout because we're lacking good boundaries. Now, boundaries can look a lot of different ways, and it includes boundaries within our own family. We often think of boundaries outside, like what am I saying yes to and putting on the calendar, and if it's too much, I'm going to feel stressed. But I want to challenge us to think about boundaries even bigger than that. Ultimately, yes, it boils down to what am I saying yes to? What am I saying no to? And how do those things impact me physically, emotionally, mentally. But boundaries don't have to be as challenging as we sometimes think they will be. And they're so incredibly helpful. Because if you want to have intimacy at home, in your family relationships, you can't be giving all of your emotional energy to people outside of the home. Even your friends, your church, volunteer responsibilities, all of that, those things are good. But if you're saying yes to all of those, you're not going to have the energy emotionally to connect at home. If you're always rushed, you're always stressed out, you're probably not communicating well with your family. We start getting passive aggressive or just demanding of people or shutting down. And especially if we're struggling with boundaries, it's really easy to start prioritizing tasks above relationships, or to prioritize people outside the home instead of people inside the home. And once it gets all the way to burnout, typically that's when we start to just emotionally, we're shutting down. We might just start saying no to absolutely everything because we're not sure what to say yes to, and we don't feel like we can say yes to anything anymore. And we stop maybe even talking to our family members, let alone connecting with our family members. So we obviously don't want to get to that point, but we don't even want to have to constantly deal with the stress along the way. So let's talk about 4 different areas in life where you have boundaries. Now, they might be weak or like invisible, or you're not really enforcing them, but there's 4 areas of life where we're going to look at boundaries. We're going to talk about physical boundaries, schedule boundaries, emotional boundaries, and spiritual boundaries. So let's start with physical, because this is often something within the home and the family that we overlook, but it really can impact our stress. With our kids, we often don't set any physical boundaries, especially when our kids are little. It's a common mom joke about like, you never go to the bathroom by yourself because your kids always want to be there. And, when I was pregnant, my mom, she would stand in the kitchen with me when I was cooking, and she would say, "Hey, I'm going to practice. You're having triplets. You need to practice." And she would start like tugging on my pants leg, "Mommy, mommy, mommy." And I was like, this is silly. But yes, with 3 little people pulling on my pants leg saying "mommy," that can get really stressful really quickly. We easily can get touched out with our kids. They need so much emotion from us and so much supervision from us and guidance from us and discipline from us and so many hugs and kisses and snuggles. But if we don't set any physical boundaries with our kids, we're not going to have any left to enjoy with our husband, or just to feel like I am my own person. And so when we think about with our kids, it's helpful to set some limits. Not 100% of your day needs to be together time with them. You can do some independent playtime. You can put them in, the nursery at church or wherever, at the gym. It's okay to have some separation. It's okay to say no if your kids want to do something with you. Sure, you want to say yes as much as is reasonable, but 100% of your time is not reasonable. But you can also try physical boundaries with your kids, trying different ways to physically fill up their cup, their love cup, high fives, shoulder hugs, back rubs. Those can be ways to get that physical connection without over touching mom, which we struggle with often. You can also try, kind of on the flip side of that, sometimes it's really helpful to just like lean into the physical connection, give that really big hug or hold the hug for an extra few seconds, really picking them up and twirling them around, something that's really connecting you physically. Sometimes that makes it easier then to put them down and walk away. You can hopefully get some space. And then another tip for physical boundaries with our kids is finding activities where they can be near you, but they're not physically on you or in your way. I find personally this is most successful if I'm cooking in the kitchen or something, getting my kids an activity to do at the kitchen table, where they're basically right there next to me. Then all the time, it's like, Mommy, look at this, Mommy, look at this. But I can glance over, I can step over, I can easily engage with them. But physically, I'm getting some space. Now, when we talk about physical boundaries in the home, we also, of course, have to think about our marriage, because you need physical intimacy with your husband. If you're going to enjoy your marriage, you need to enjoy physical intimacy. Now, I'll just add a little side note here that if that is a big struggle in your marriage, which for a lot of us it is, sex is such a big taboo topic and there's so much baggage there. I have a page on the website. If you go to loveyourpeoplewell.com/marriage, you'll see a link to some online courses that I recommend, all from a completely Christian perspective, but to help dive into and deepen and enjoy the physical intimacy in your marriage. That's not the focus of our conversation today, but I want you to know that those resources are there. That's at loveyourpeoplewell.com/marriage. And we do have some earlier episodes about building up and enjoying, spicing up the physical side of your marriage. I'll put links to those in the show notes for today as well over on the blog. But just even right now, thinking about setting what physical boundaries will look like, with the goal being, I'm not so stressed out. I'm not feeling burnt out. I can actually enjoy my marriage and my family. It can be really helpful to, first of all, build intimacy with your husband in other areas of life, emotional intimacy, mental intimacy, maybe read the same books or listen to the same podcast, read the same news articles so you have something to talk about, sharing some hobbies together, doing things he enjoys that aren't necessarily physical, making his favorite dessert or doing some sort of activity he enjoys, watching his choice of a movie, something like that. Building intimacy outside of the physical can help us have boundaries there where then we can really enjoy and invest in when we are physically intimate with our husband. Lean into that. Try to enjoy that. If he sees you putting effort into that, that is going to mean the world. That it's not just something we do, it's something we enjoy. But it's worth thinking about, what do physical boundaries look like with my family? Do you have any? Are people just, your kids hanging on you all day long, and then your husband wants to be on you all night long, and you're never getting time by yourself? You're never getting that physical refreshment, even just of a long hot shower by yourself, or wearing the clothes you want to wear without somebody tugging on your pants leg all day long. Finding something physical, setting some boundaries there, can be really helpful in managing our stress. But let's also talk about scheduling boundaries, because here's the reality of mom life. You probably have the most control of anyone in your family over everyone's schedules. The daily routine, the weekly calendar, the commitments that show up on your Google Calendar or the kitchen wall calendar, whatever it is. You probably have the most control over all of that, which means you have the best opportunity to change it if it needs to change. So here's some tips for those scheduling boundaries. And it starts by figuring out, maybe this is a really deep time of prayer and journaling and thinking, but get clear on what are your actual priorities. It's probably easy to say, oh, my family is my top priority. Okay, great. Could I look at your calendar, your schedule, and tell you that's your priority? Are you actually having dinner together every night as a family? Are you all in the extracurricular activities where no one gets home at the same time until it's bedtime? What are your actual priorities? And put those big rocks, those top urgent things into your schedule, into your calendar first. And that will show you, do I really have space for other things? Because a second tip here is you want to allow white space in the calendar, in your daily schedule. The more that you are running from A to B to C, and there's maybe 5 minutes in between, if that, you're going to feel stressed. Of course you're going to feel stressed. We all would feel stressed. But having a Saturday every once in a while where absolutely nothing is on the calendar, that can feel so refreshing. And having a morning activity, but maybe not an afternoon activity, can feel so freeing. So make sure there's that white space. And if you're not sure where to start, just cancel something right now. Call someone up and say, I'm so sorry. It looks like I've overcommitted myself. I need to back out of whatever this obligation might be. Family comes before those outside obligations. That's a place to start. But if you really want to maintain this and manage that stress, you're going to have to practice saying no. And I literally mean practice it. Stand in the bathroom, look in the mirror, and say the word no. Say it out loud. If you know you're going to have to follow up with a friend or someone who's asked you to do something, you might want to practice saying no to the actual thing. No, I'm sorry, I can't help with the bake sale this year. No, I'm so sorry, we really can't do any more play dates right now. Sometimes saying it out loud, if you can't say it to yourself, you're never going to say it to your friend. And it's not a great solution to say, well, I'll just text it because that's easier. It might be easier, but it's not exactly relationship building. So just practice. Get more and more comfortable with the word so that you can actually say it to other people when you need to. And a final tip here for scheduling boundaries, what that looks like in your home with your family, I would really encourage you to take a look at what your daily rhythms and routines look like. Because here's just one example here of a scheduling boundary that I am struggling with. And that is nap time, right? My kids are still young enough that they take a nap, or, for my son at least, it's more like rest time than it is nap time. But that's my time. That's me time. I usually use it to record episodes of the podcast or do some of the blogging or clean the house and listen to a podcast. That is time for me to do something I enjoy, to get a little break from the kids. Yeah, they need the sleep, but also I need the break. I need that part of my schedule. But when our rhythm is all off track and my son, like today, is not napping and he keeps knocking on the door every 5 minutes needing something else, well, I'm getting frustrated. I'm feeling stressed. I'm not getting done the things I'm excited and looking forward to getting done. And so that tells me we need to maybe review what that nap time routine looks like and clarify. Now, I'm not going to call it boundaries with my kids to them, but that's ultimately what it is, a boundary on our schedule. That mommy needs this time, and they need this time. But that's one example there when we think about just even at home with our family, what our schedule looks like. The better our rhythms and routines and habits are, the more likely it is we're going to be able to focus on the things we want to and manage the stress instead of building the stress. So let's turn and look at emotional boundaries. And this obviously is connected with the other things, with our physical bodies and our schedule. But emotionally, you need to have things in your life that refresh you, that fill you up. That daily time with the Lord, reading His Word, talking to Him in prayer, that is so helpful for emotionally kind of staying calibrated, knowing what's going on, not getting overwhelmed and stressed out about things around you. Build up that habit of time with the Lord to fill yourself up with His presence and His Word. This would also, of course, include things like self-care, doing activities, small or big, that you enjoy and that refresh you. You might want to grab our free 51 self-care ideas list off the freebies page. That can be a great place to start with simple, quick, guilt-free self-care activities, but doing things that fill you up rather than pouring out into others is going to be really helpful for managing stress. But this would also include making sure you are connecting with other people. Connecting with God, yes. Connecting also with your friends. Getting plugged in at church. Getting time relationally with the people who matter to you. Your husband, your kids, maybe your mom, maybe your best friend. Like spending time, not just doing things for people. I did the grocery shopping, I paid the bills, I made dinner for the family, but did you sit down to enjoy that meal with your family? Have you had a date night lately with your husband? Getting those things, setting boundaries around, are these things happening? Am I managing the tasks in the way that allows me to enjoy the people, to connect with the people? And that's going to mean saying no to some things, but it might also mean setting some rhythms, a weekly date night or monthly date night, getting together for coffee every Saturday with your friend or whatever it is. Sometimes rhythms are really helpful because mom life can be so busy and things are always changing. And then another tip there for emotional boundaries is to take stock of your personal values and live into them. And I know I already talked about clarifying your priorities and making sure your schedule actually matches those priorities. But emotionally, we need to think about the things we really value. I have a high value on reading with my kids, doing activities actually with them. That it not only builds up the relationship, but it builds me up. I enjoy it. It emotionally is pleasant for me and filling for me. And so I need to set boundaries in my life to make sure I get that time. I make that time. But there are other things where our values would point us to say no to something. Thinking about how you and your husband manage the family finances. We often have values attached with that. How often do we see extended family? What does that time look like? You're going to have values associated with that. Being a person who is kind and compassionate and patient, those are things you probably value. And so working to live that out in your communication styles and things like that, emotionally, that's going to make you happy. You're going to feel good that you're living the way you want to live. So setting boundaries to say no to the things that get in the way of that, and to purposefully prioritize the things that are valuable to you, are going to help you protect your own emotions. And then the last piece I want to highlight here is our spiritual boundaries. I particularly am thinking here of the section in Ephesians chapter 6 about the spiritual armor. But you need spiritual boundaries if you are going to manage stress in this crazy, busy, broken world that we live in. So that's going to connect, of course, with your schedule. Are you really prioritizing time reading the Bible and praying, a daily quiet time or devotional time or whatever you want to call it? Are you connecting with the Lord? But also setting boundaries around how you live out what God tells you to live out in His Word, and praying over the things that are stressing you out, praying over the things you're struggling with, asking God for wisdom, asking God for the fruit of the Spirit, and being intentional about the spiritual armor that's described in Ephesians chapter 6. The spiritual armor talks about the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, shoes for our feet that are ready with the gospel of peace, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, and making sure that these things are an active part of your life. Truth and righteousness and sharing the gospel and investing in your faith and understanding salvation and diving into that, all of these things, if they're not part of your life, you're going to feel more stressed out. You're going to start to burn out because you're giving, but you're doing it of your own strength instead of the strength of the Lord. Now, there are 1,000 things you could do every day that would help with these spiritual boundaries, but the place to start is getting time with God, reading the Bible, praying, asking Him for what you need, confessing the places where you're struggling, recognizing that His strength is bigger and better than your strength. So those are a few tips when it comes to setting good boundaries, physical, scheduling, emotional, spiritual boundaries that are going to help you enjoy family life because you'll manage the stress differently. The burnout will not be as powerful, will not be as frequent, and you'll be able to connect with your people. And as we wrap up our conversation today around boundaries and managing this hard emotion of stress, I'm excited to tell you that it's finally ready. Actually, I think I've mentioned it here and there on the podcast for like a year, but I have been working on a new devotional that is now ready, now available, about finding joy in the journey of motherhood. When you're feeling stressed, when it's just discouraging and it's not looking the way you thought it would look or you want it to look, there is joy that God has planned for you and your family in the journey of motherhood. And so I'll share a little sneak peek into that devotional in our Friday faith follow-up. But you can access it now. I will put the link right there in the description for today's episode. And of course, it's on the website. Just head over to loveyourpeoplewell.com/parenting. It's probably the number one place to look at it. It'll be right there at the top. But it's on the main resources page. It's on the devotional page. Of course, finding joy in the journey of motherhood. I'll have a sneak peek for you into that devotional in Friday's Faith Follow-Up episode. And if you're in our Patreon community, tomorrow we're going to take a look at that self-care piece that we talked about because we are just wrapping up our 30-day challenge to do something every day for self-care. But I'll talk through a few ideas for how to keep that going, how to make that realistic in your busy Christian mom life. And if you're not in our Patreon community, you are always invited to join us because that is a really wonderful way to get a little more connected and get some extra perks here with the show, supporting this ministry. But my friend, my number one takeaway for you today is to consider the boundaries in your life. Where are you strong? Where are you weak? And pray that the Lord will help you to do something a little bit different to strengthen those boundaries so you can enjoy family life more. All right, my friend, hugs and blessings to you. I'll talk to you soon.